Hi friends, Mark here again. We are studying the end times through the lens of my book, The Threshold of Exile, published in 2024. Encourage you to pick up a copy. We are in studying the book of Revelation here and re-examining the end times, which is the name of the podcast, and we are now in the book of Revelation after parsing through other elements of eschatology, the first three sections of the book. This is section 4 of the book, and it deals with the book of Revelation. We've gone through the first 13 chapters now. We're approaching and looking into some of the things that are contained in Revelation 14. But just by way of reminder, we've seen in chapter 12, we kind of saw a little turn in chapter 12 where John begins to see almost a new perspective on things in Revelation 12. And we saw this heavenly woman, which we said was the New Jerusalem, giving birth to Jesus, the firstborn of the resurrection of the dead. We see the church come into view in the rest of her offspring, and of course we see this dragon coming into view as well. And of course this is we can be fairly well certain that this many-headed, many-horned beast is the dragon or Satan himself. And he takes on the image of the Roman Empire in verse 13, or in chapter 13, where we see two different beasts, the first of which is really, I think, the image of Rome, which is derived out of Daniel 7 and 19, and this is a fearful, the most fearful of Daniel's beasts. And we saw him assimilate the powers of the previous three empires, Babylon, Persia, and Greece, and take them onto himself, and he becomes this monstrous, powerful beast, so that the beast has now taken on the likeness and the power of these three previous empires. And of course this beast suffers a mortal head wound, and we suggested that this was in the time of Nero, when Nero committed suicide, that the empire went into total disarray and near collapse, and was finally recovered in the time of Vespasian, a new emperor who brought stability back to the empire. Very interesting, actually, that there are coins stamped with Vespasian helping Rome rise to her feet again and bearing the motto Roma Resurgens, which is a resurgent Rome. So that's a kind of an interesting factor there, that there were actually coins made celebrating Vespasian's bringing Rome back to life. And so we also saw this whole issue of the worship of Caesar, the worship of the dragon, and the worship of the beast. The worship of Caesar was really the worship of the dragon himself. And he displays arrogance and blasphemy and aggressive persecution of the church for 42 months. And then we saw this other beast, the land beast, comes up. Not the earth beast we suggested. It is the land beast, because it arrives it comes up out of the land of Israel, promoting allegiance to Rome. And it's a composite image. It has two horns. And we suggested that this is a composite civil and religious combination or correspondence between the Roman authorities in Israel and the Sadducees. And because this is a two-horned, it speaks like a lamb, or has the appearance of a lamb, holy and harmless, and but it spoke like a dragon. So it has the elements of let's say the holy Sadducees, the leadership of Israel, but in reality its allegiance is to Rome, who is the dragon. And so the precedent for this kind of imagery comes from Daniel 8 and 20, which we saw that there was a ram in Daniel's vision, represented the kings of Media and Persia. And so there's two-horned land represented two different kingdoms, if you will, that were united in a singular purpose. And of course Persia eventually became the dominating or the powerful force. And this civic horn, which we said is the Roman appointed officials, they served the interests of the empire. They oversaw their appointed jurisdictions in the land and maintained lucrative relationships with the Jewish aristocracy. The Sadducees were probably this religious horn. Many of them were among the chief priests inciting the people, who they themselves were calling for Jesus to be crucified. Remember when they said that we have no king but Caesar, as the chief priests were crying this. And this, of course, that's the Sadducees. And so we basically saw that this is an unholy collaboration. We cited a couple of different scholars regarding this. Richard Horsley, especially, the Jewish high priest, performed faithfully in the interest of the Roman government upon who their position depended, and the aristocracy remained consistently pro-Roman, and he writes this in High Priest and Politics of Roman Palestine. By the way, while I'm at it, beloved, we've said more often than not that just this whole idea of pushing this stuff off into future speculation about a beast, an antichrist, and the whole world bowing down to some future figure who's sitting in the temple, when in fact there are books and there is literature that explains the conditions of the New Testament. One particularly marvelous book is Magical Motifs in the Book of Revelation by Rodney Lawrence Thomas. And he goes into all of this about how there were talking statues and the sorcery and different things. That he mentions here that the statues were given life and shown to be able to talk and sweat and all kinds of different things. It says in the cities of Asia Minor, statues of Roman emperors and gods were numerous. They were placed in temples, public buildings, along the streets, in the marketplaces, in fountains, and on gates. Statues of emperors often were designated to resemble traditional representations of the gods. With its panoply of images, there are numerous reports of strange phenomena associated with these images in which it was deemed that the gods were giving signs in some form. But the whole point is that these statues and these various types of altars and things, they were shown to be able to talk and to sweat. And also another great book here is The Antichrist and the Second Coming by Duncan Mackenzie. These books contain a wealth of historical information. These images that John's seeing are not just pure speculation about some strange, wild things going on in the future. This was a strange and wild time in the New Testament era when Rome was demanding allegiance, when Rome was saying, if you don't have the mark, which we discussed, was something that had begun back under the Ptolemies, where Jews were actually stamped or marked with the brand of Dionysius. There were requirements that if you didn't give a pinch of salt at an altar to Caesar, you couldn't get a document that was stamped that would allow you to buy and sell in the marketplaces. This is all historical fact, folks, and so we have to look first at what's evident to us in history, in actual history, rather than speculating on something that might be, And sure, not every detail perfectly orients itself to Revelation, but there is certainly enough here to say, wait a minute, we can see this as evidence in the Roman period and the relationships. Even there's one more I might even point out, that the writings of Lucian of Samosata, he's called, in the 2nd century AD. He says that in Hierapolis, which is a city, by the way, mentioned by Paul in Colossians 4, it was near Laodicea and Colossae. He says there were many rare sights, many striking statues, and the gods made their presence felt. The statues sweat, move, and utter oracles and shout. A shout has often been raised when the temple was closed, and it was heard by many. And these temples, by the way, were a principal source of their wealth. And so we see all of this in stuff that John is describing in Revelation 13 as very much part of the Roman era and some of the things that were going on, especially with regard to the worship of Caesar. And this land beast who is has made the image of the beast and is demanding that the people of the land, Israel, bow down to worship it. Okay, this is not totally unheard of, the whole idea, because these Sadducees and the aristocracy in Jerusalem had such a vested interest in security with Rome. They did not want Jerusalem destroyed because it was their center of commerce, and we'll see that very vividly in Revelation 18. But this was their center of commerce, their seat of power, and their relationships with Rome were such that they would buy and sell the priesthood, and it was very lucrative for both parties. And so this land beast, who is this unholy collaboration between the Roman officials in Israel and the Sadducees and the aristocracy, is very real. And this is what John is picturing. He sees a land beast which is arising in Israel. He sees the sea beast which arises out of the sea, which is obviously from among the nations, which is Rome. Okay, and so we talked a little bit about the stamping of fugitives and soldiers with the in allegiance to their superiors. They were actually branded, and of course we talked a little bit about this whole idea of the numerology or the gematria, where names would be far too long to stamp on someone, but it would be very easy to put a number, and those numbers come up in Nero Caesar's name figures out to 666. Vespasian's and Titus's name in Greek, Latinos, or the Greek, or a Latin-speaking man, and there are other images that are similar on coins that reflect this whole idea of 666. So this is all first century history. It's very evident in first century history. Then as we come to Revelation 14, we have a very, very interesting set of visions, and it's important for us as we look at these visions that we understand it's not a collection of random visions, but a cohesive, interrelated series of developments, okay? I need you to understand that. Context is king. Context matters. And so if we were just to take these things that we see in Romans or in Revelation 14 and just say this and then this and then this and this, and just try to figure all of them out independently, we're going to miss something, because there is a cohesive, interrelated, as I said, series of developments in Revelation 14 that help us to make sense of everything that's going on in this chapter, how things are being described. And we need to remember that although we understand that we take the Bible literally in the sense that we understand that it's describing actual events in history, but it is describing them symbolically. So we don't assume that everything that we're reading should be understood literally as happening in that manner. But the event itself, the things that it's describing are of course, literal, real, historical events. And that's what we see in Revelation 14, as we have seen in other texts, okay? So in Revelation 14, verses 1 to 5, we discuss this 144,000, this remnant of Israel, and how they are now standing on Mount Zion. They've obtained the kingdom. They are they've escaped this destruction that's coming upon Jerusalem, and that's exactly what we read in Joel 2:32, the very from the very text that Peter quotes on Pentecost. This is what Joel prophesied. I'll pour out my spirit, and your young men will dream dreams, and your young men will see visions. Your old men will dream dreams. I'll pour out my spirit, and they'll prophesy. And then in Joel's prophecy, it goes on to say, and on Mount Zion there will be survivors. There will be those that escape. Okay? And that survivor is the same word that Paul quotes from Isaiah actually in Romans 9, where he says, if the Lord had not spared us a few survivors, we'd have been like Sodom and Gomorrah, okay? And so he's saying that there is at this present time an elect according to God's grace. And so Paul sees that elect remnant in his own day, okay? And that's the 144,000 that John sees. And then the first angel comes into view in verses 6 to 7, where he says that the gospel in the mid-heaven is being preached. And I suggested to you that this gospel, the eternal gospel, should probably be understood as the gospel pertaining to the age. It's the Ionios gospel. It's the gospel that is telling us that the new age, the anticipated age that the Jews were looking for, this Olam Haba, is about to come, okay? And I suggested that this may just simply be nothing more than the apostolic dispersion out into the world to preach the gospel, just as Jesus said that the gospel will be preached in all the nations in Matthew 24:14. He said, and then the end would come. And so this proclamation now is that this age to come, this new age, the end of the old age, and the new age is coming, and that's the nature of the message, okay? The gospel itself, of course, we said, is eternal. The gospel itself has always been that God promised that he would send Messiah. But now we're coming into fruition. And then the second angel out of nowhere in verse 8 is saying that Babylon is fallen. Now what's that got to do with this declaration that the gospel of the age have come? Well, we're going to see that this Babylon is actually ancient Jerusalem. It is the fall of Jerusalem that is concurrent with this arrival of the age to come. And Jesus kind of gave us that in Matthew 24 when he said they'll see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of glory. Now when he says that, he's not talking about the Son of Man coming down to stand on the earth. He's quoting from Daniel where the Son of Man goes up to the Ancient of Days. That's in Daniel 7:13 and 14. They'll understand that the Son of Man has now gone to presented the kingdom is presented before the Father, and in that context the tribes of the land will mourn. What are they mourning? They're going to be mourning at the fall and collapse. The kingdom is being established under Jesus, which means everything pertaining to the old world, the old covenant, the old age is now coming down. There's no room for this anymore in Christ's new established kingdom, where his people would be free from all of those accoutrements of the Old Testament, the temple service, the temple worship, the priesthood, and all that. The new age is dawning, where Jesus put it very well to the woman of Samaria. He says that the time is coming where they won't be worshiping here on Mount of Samaria or Jerusalem, but the true worship of God, worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. So the new era of spirit and truth is replacing the old era of static temple worship of bulls and goats and bloody messes in the sacrifices. God has made one offering once for all, in order that the kingdom would now become established in his Son as he died for sin and then rose and burst forth out of the grave in a conquering of death, and to bring the rest of us into his glory. Now, so he's saying that all this is falling now. Now the third angel comes along, and we have this chilling declaration that, well, we should probably read it. In verses chapter 14, 9 to 11, if anyone worship the beast in his image and receives the mark on his forehead or his hand, he will also drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is mixed in full strength in the cup of his anger, and he will be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb, and the smoke of their torment goes up forever, and they have no rest day and night, those who worship the beast in his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name. Now we've already determined that this is coming on primarily to the land of Israel. It says, we read in Revelation 13:8, and Young's literal translation captures it very well. It says, and bow before it, the image of the beast, shall all who are dwelling upon the land. That's a fairly literal translation, but it's those who are dwelling upon the land of Israel. And so one of the things that we've tried to do here, and what I've tried to do in the book, and I spent really episodes 28 to 32 of this podcast going extensively through what I have in my book, The Threshold of Exile, in chapters 13 to 16, is to try to dispel this idea of eternal conscious torment. Now, I really want to make sure we understand that I didn't write this book to prove this doctrine versus that doctrine. I didn't write it to say this is a doctrine about the coming of Jesus. Here's another doctrine about the fate of the lost. Okay, I didn't write it with that specific purpose. What I attempted to do in the book is to help the reader understand the historical context of the New Testament. And when we understand that, certain theological ideas come to the surface. One of them was a re-examination of Jesus' coming, which we said first and foremost happened in the first century in the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, whatever we may believe about the end of the world, I'm not dealing with that right now, but I'm trying to get the reader to understand that there are many texts that deal with Jesus' arrival and judgment in 70 AD upon Jerusalem, but also this whole imagery that arises out of the judgments that are spoken of in the New Testament also pertained, and we made these links between eternal fire and unquenchable fire and Gehenna, which is really the correct word, not hell, all had to do with the burning of Jerusalem and the tragic fate of the Jews in that same period. So we have these two theological ideas arising out of a single historical context, all right? It's not just my proof text versus their proof text. It's understanding this context in which these things occurred and are written and they're said, and how the disciples and how Jesus himself mined these ideas back from their imagery in the Old Testament. These things are all descriptions that are used in the Old Testament that are being brought back and put before Israel to say, look, this is all going to happen again as it happened in your history in 722 BC when Assyria destroyed the northern kingdom, and in 586 BC when Babylon destroyed the southern kingdom. Again, in 70 AD, there's going to be a destruction by the Romans. And so we have these parallels between the language of the prophets and the language of Jesus and his disciples, okay? And this is no different when we come to this this whole idea of, first of all, we've already spoken concerning giving allegiance to the beast. This is directed at those who give allegiance to the beast. And we've already seen how the vested interest of the Sadducees and their influence over the poor masses in giving allegiance to the beast because of their own vested interest, their own financial vested interest. And so this allegiance was, and they used, these, whatever you want to call it, talking statues, or the use of rejection or the inability to buy and sell in the trade guilds without this demonstration of allegiance to Caesar. This was something very prominent in the time. Then he says that they would be tormented with fire and brimstone. Well, first of all, let's consider the fact of torment. This torment does not have to be eternal. As a matter of fact, we're going to see how this torment has to do with the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, which is the Babylon of Revelation, okay? And as we try to point out here that, again, that this is very much to do with Israel, okay, in the time just prior and just up into the destruction of Jerusalem. Now let's look at Revelation 18 about torment for a minute. And we see that to the degree that she glorified herself, this is 18:7-10, and lived sensuously, the same degree give her torment and mourning, for she says in her heart, sit as a queen, and I am not a widow. And that comes right out of Isaiah 47:7, the destruction of Babylon. And he will and will never see mourning. For this reason, in one day her plagues will come, pestilence and mourning and famine. She will be burned up with fire. Okay, and remember, we learned that in the Old Testament, Revelations, or in Jeremiah, he spoke of the city being burned up with fire. Okay, being burned with unquenchable fire. For the Lord God who judges her is strong, and the kings of the earth who committed acts of immortality. Now this is the land. This is all the commerce that was occurring in the land of Israel. Jerusalem being this great center of commerce, and vested interests, financial vested interests. And it says that the kings of the earth committed immorality and lived sensuously with her, will weep and lament over her when they see the smoke. This is exactly what we're seeing in Revelation 14. When we see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance because of the fear of her torment, saying, woe, woe, the great city Babylon, the strong city, for your hour of judgment has come. Now we're going to look at Revelation 18 in more detail, and why I believe the scriptures teach us that it is Jerusalem. A hint, if you want, is the harlot Babylon. Well, Isaiah 1, how the faithful city has become a harlot. This harlotry is a specific motif in the Old Testament, and I'm going to share with you when we get to Revelation 18 a little more clearly. But we see this whole idea of this torment and burning with fire, and the imagery from the Old Testament. Isaiah 34, 9 and 10. Edom's streams will be turned to pitch. Its land will become a blazing or fiery pitch, and it will not be quenched night and day. Its smoke will rise forever. Now, isn't that interesting? This is basically the same language, but let's look for a second real quick at the rest of that passage, because in Isaiah 34 we see this land is now a burning pitch, okay, a fiery pitch, and its smoke rising forever, and it will not be quenched night and day. But in Isaiah 34, bear with me a minute here as we get it for you. In Isaiah 34, it says exactly following this, it will not be quenched day or night, its smoke will go up forever. From generation to generation it will be desolate, none will pass through it forever and ever. But pelican and hedgehog will possess it, an owl and a raven will dwell in it. He will stretch over it the line of desolation and the plumb line of emptiness. Its nobles, there is no one there whom they would proclaim king, and its princes will be nothing. Thorns will come up on its fortified towers, thistles will in its fortified cities, and it will become a haunt of jackals, and in the abode of ostriches. Desert creatures will meet with the wolves. The hairy goat will also cry in its kind. Yes, the night monster will settle there and find herself a resting place. He goes on. If this is a burning pitch that's burning forever and ever and ever and ever, and smoke is going up, how are all these living creatures able to live there? Well, see, this is not to be understood that this is a literal fire, a literal event. That what's happening here is that John is seeing and using the same imagery as Isaiah used to describe both in 14 and in 18 the burning of Jerusalem, the destruction of those who were aligned with the beast, who were aligned with Rome, and trying to tell them that if you do this, you have a fate. Everything there is going to be burned up. The land is going to be burned up. The city is going to be burned up. The temple is going to be burned up. And that smoke, by the way, that rises forever, has to do with God, as it is a memorial before God, okay? In Genesis 19, we read regarding Sodom and Gomorrah. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and the smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace. Sodom and Gomorrah isn't still burning today, okay? The smoke is the memorial before God. In Leviticus 2 and other similar passages, the priest offers the grain offering up in smoke as a memorial portion on the altar. The smoke arises as a portion. And we see this now very vividly also back in Genesis 8, 20 and 21. Regarding Noah, the Lord smelled the soothing aroma of his sacrifice after the flood, and said to himself, I will never again curse the ground on account of man, and I will never destroy every living thing. The Lord smelled the soothing aroma. The word in Hebrew there means it appeases, it relaxes, it rests. It's this memorial smoke is basically something that's telling God, okay, yes, I have appeased, I have satisfied my wrath with this event. It doesn't mean that things continue to burn forever. It just simply means that this eternal fire that occurs it brings utter destruction. And this symbolism, this imagery of smoke rising, is that of something that God is saying, I have appeased my wrath, I have completed the judgment, and this now my judgment is at rest. Okay, I can rest my judgment. Okay. Now the text also speaks about those, they'll find no rest. Well, okay. Does that mean they're having no rest in hell? Well, let's ask ourselves, what do the texts say about it? It's interesting that the inability to find rest has Old Testament precedences about Israel's destruction and exile. Look at Deuteronomy 28, 63 to 66. The Lord will scatter you, and this is in his judgments, among those nations you shall find no rest. There will be no resting place for the sole of your foot, and you will be in dread, a reasonable equivalent to torment. You will be in dread night and day. Lamentations 1:3, following the destruction of Jerusalem, Jeremiah cries out, Judah has gone into exile under affliction and under harsh servitude. She dwells among the nations. That is much like we read in Revelation 18:21 and Revelation 8:8. She's been cast into the sea. She's now dwelling among the nations, but she has found, guess what? No rest. Lamentations 5:5. Our pursuers are on our necks. We are worn out. There is no rest for us. See, so these images that we get are not of people burning in hell. They're images of a nation fallen, its economy, its temple, its central city, all being destroyed by the Romans. The death and destruction is throughout the land. The empire has taken them captive. The people are dispersed among the nations now, which they had been for 2,000 years until our recent return by the Zionists, which I'm not going to go there. I'm not sure it has a whole lot to do with the Bible, but the fact that there's no rest for them among the nations once they were scattered. Their place of rest, their land, their temple, their covenant domain has been totally and utterly desolated and destroyed, which, by the way, is what Jesus told them in Matthew 23. At the end of Matthew 23, he said, you didn't recognize the time of your visitation. You're going to murder those that I sent to you. Your house is going to be left to you desolate. So, and then finally, he says that this all happens in the presence of the Lamb. Well, what happened in the presence of the Lamb? What did Jesus say would happen in the presence of the Lamb? Well, in Luke 19, we have the parable of the minas. Okay, God distributes to different ones different amount of money to do business with until he comes. In the middle of that parable, it says, but his citizens, and of course Jesus would be speaking of the Jews at the time, hated him and sent a delegation after him saying, we do not want this man to reign over us. That's an interesting point. Whose allegiance had they become to? They began to give their allegiance to Caesar and to Rome. We do not want this man to reign over us. He says, but these enemies of mine who did not want me to reign over them, bring them here and slay them where? In my presence. He doesn't say torment them, torture them in my presence. He says, slay them in my presence. When my presence is there, when my presence comes to bring judgment upon the city and Babylon and the nation and the land, in my presence, I will bring death and destruction. This is, of course, this is very unfortunate stuff, people. I don't mean to be so morbid about it. And I also want to, again, add that caveat. This has nothing to do with Jews today, okay? This is a judgment upon a historical people, okay? And again, in Luke 20, he will come and put the vine growers to death and will give the vineyard to others, okay? He says the same thing. It's the end result of this, those who have aligned themselves with the beast, aligned themselves with Rome, is death, not eternal torment. How does this happen? Matthew 22. And the rest seized his slaves and treated them abusively and then killed them. Now the king was angry. He sent his armies and destroyed those murderers and set their city on fire. That's the fall of Jerusalem, Jesus predicts in Matthew 22. Now, this whole allegiance to the beast that Revelation 14 is concerned with. John 19, 12 to 15 and Matthew 12 say it so vividly. When Jesus was presented by Pilate, Pilate made efforts to release him. This is verses 12 to 15 of John 19. But the Jews cried out, saying, if you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. They're saying to Pilate. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king, that's Jesus, opposes Caesar. And Pilate says to the Jews, behold your king. And they cried out, the Jews cried out, away with him, crucify him. And Pilate said to them, shall I crucify your king? The chief priests, those Sadducees who had the vested interest in their relationship with Rome, says these words, we have no king but Caesar. We have no king but Caesar. They verbalized their true allegiance. Now, Jesus issued a warning, and God did not forget the defiant rejection of their long-awaited Messiah and their declaration of allegiance to Rome. Listen to the words of Jesus in Matthew 12, 36 and 37. But I tell you that every careless word that people speak, they shall give an accounting for it in the day of judgment. For by your words, we have no king but Caesar. By your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. So, beloved, I don't see anything in Revelation 14, 9 to 11 about eternal torment, everlasting torment, people burning in hell. In its context, in this arrival of the New Age, the declaration that Babylon, the old Jerusalem, is fallen, is no longer, has its high place in the economy of God. And then within that context, we see anyone who has given their allegiance to the beast, to Rome, will suffer the fate, okay? And of course, the church escaped all this, and the remnant of Israel escaped all this because their true allegiance was they followed the Lamb wherever he went. And so we've got more to cover in chapter 14 because, again, the flow continues as we're going to see the fourth and fifth angel come into play. And we're going to see then now the two harvests where I'm going to suggest to you that they describe the fate of the land and the city in the last part of Revelation 14. God bless you. I hope you were able to follow this. There's more to come. We'll try to keep reviewing some of these critical concepts so that you can get them ingrained in your heart and in your head. Until next time, God bless you and thanks you for tuning in.